Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is titled Designing a Modern SharePoint Intranet. My name is Dougie Wood and I'm the Creative Director here at Valto. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and that's all basically, if you don't know what an MVP is, it's an award for basically creating content and sharing knowledge with the community. And my MVP recognition is specifically in SharePoint. So today, what we're going to be talking a bit about is actually the concepts of SharePoint and designing an intranet. Now, if you've never used SharePoint before, or you've heard of it, not too sure what it's about, we're going to touch on some key kind of fundamental aspects of SharePoint. First thing to mention is that SharePoint is obviously a massive product. It has 200 million worldwide users, and these are daily users of SharePoint online for accessing company information and documents and so forth. It is the leading kind of document management and intranet platform, with over 80% of Fortune 500 companies using SharePoint as their trusted platform and technology to host their intranet. There's over 200,000 different organizations from all different sectors, sizes, that are using SharePoint for many different purposes, including intranet type of functionality like news, events, and a single source of truth. And roughly about 70% of the market share for content and collaborational technologies, SharePoint owns 75% of the market share of that, and it's been leading the way for the past 20 or so years. So the first thing I'm going to talk a little bit about before I start jumping into some examples of SharePoint is finding the balance. So when it comes to designing your SharePoint intranet, you really have to find the balance between a number of things, because not one SharePoint intranet homepage and site is going to kind of fit all kind of models and everyone's requirements. So the first thing to think about is functionality versus aesthetics. Now, what I mean by this is that there's a certain level of kind of navigation and things like that compared to how you want it to look. Now, some organizations don't necessarily have a lot of imagery or video or visual content, and they end up leaning a lot more to kind of more functional looking SharePoint sites, which are more kind of buttons, navigations, things like that, document driven stuff. Whereas aesthetic is more like you can use a lot of imagery, you can use videos, you can make it look and feel very kind of visual and easy on the eye. But there's a balance to be struck there, that some organizations go too heavy towards functionality and it just is a bit boring. People don't really necessarily want to come to it. It's not very appealing. It doesn't look very good. Some people go too far the other way, where they're looking at kind of the aesthetic side of things, but it's just too much like imagery. There's too much content on the page. There's too much to take in, and from a sort of accessibility point of view, sometimes if there's too many imagery or scrolling carousels and things like that, it can be quite difficult to consume the information. Then we've got what we call manual versus automation. So this is thinking about finding the balance of the content that's on the SharePoint site. Where is that kind of content coming from? How manual is it to create content which is going on there, and what can potentially be automated? So what can you pull through, or necessarily not necessarily automating the kind of process, but automating the content. So what are you already doing which is creating content? Are you already creating things like monthly newsletters and things like that, which potentially, rather than publishing them via an email, you could publish them via the SharePoint site? So again, it's finding ways to keep content fresh and engaging on your intranet. Navigation versus search. So again, this is another very common kind of thing that you have to find the right level of balance for, which is when you've got navigations in your SharePoint intranet, often there's, and we're going to look at a few examples of this in a moment, you've got things like the hub navigation bar. And the hub navigation bar is designed to have 3 layers of navigation, where you can easily sort of linked out to different things. We'll look at that in a second, but finding the kind of the difference between how are our users going to use navigational based drop downs and things like that versus what are they going to use the search boxes for, to use to search to find content on the site, and we'll have a look at that in a second. As I say, navigation versus content, very much like that functionality versus aesthetic kind of piece of how much of it is going to be content, so news articles, events, things like that, versus where you're going to put the navigation. And we're going to look at a few examples in a moment of different types of navigation. But as I say, how much of the page is going to be filled with navigation, how much is going to be filled with content, and how much content. And this again is another thing you've got to think about is that if you're going to create a design which is heavily reliant on a lot of news articles or things like that being published, you need to think about actually how much that content you can actually commit to. So say, for example, you've got a news feed and you've got, say, 10 news articles which are pulling up onto the homepage. How often are you going to be creating a new news article? Is it going to be daily, weekly, monthly? And if it's going to be monthly, then you've got 10 months worth of news articles displaying on the homepage, which to me feels like that will be far too long, because you'd be in summer in June, July, and you'd still have news articles about the Christmas party, for example, which is something which is very common with intranets, is becoming stagnant and not having new, fresh information. So making sure you think about how much content, how frequently you're going to be creating it. And that's what I mean by reverse engineer the amount of content. Think about the page, think about the design, think about what content it's on there, and reverse engineer how much content you can physically get. It's not necessarily how much you personally can create, but as a business, as an organization, how much content is going to be generated and how fresh is that going to be? And where is content coming from? As I say, it's not all just going to come from you. Where's it going to come from? Different departments and things like that. So I just want to jump in and just quickly take a look at a couple of examples of SharePoint sites. So just going back to, as I say, an intranet homepage, this is a very common looking intranet homepage. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the design elements of this. So across the top, we have our navigation. And I was saying earlier, we need to be kind of thinking about the kind of how much navigation. Oops, I just clicked the wrong thing here. Bear me 2 seconds. Let's get that back. There we go. So we need to be thinking about the kind of navigation and how easily we're making it to find content. Now, you've probably heard this concept before, that users don't want to click more than 3 times to find content. And having something like a mega menu makes that a lot easier to get to specific areas of your intranet rather than have to click through multiple things. So with a mega menu, you can see I can actually drill down into 3 layers. I've got departments, I've got HR, and then underneath HR, I've got policies, leave requests, employee benefits. Now, these can all link off to completely different things. As long as it's got a URL, a hyperlink, we can link to anything. It could be a SharePoint site, SharePoint page, SharePoint folder, SharePoint document, but it doesn't have to even be SharePoint. It could be linking out to external leave request apps that you're using, or maybe you've got an employee benefits website. For example, maybe if you've got Bupa, you might link to the Bupa homepage, for example, for people to go and find that information themselves. Let's say finding the kind of right balance of navigation for you. I'd say with the navigation bars, ideally you don't really want more than 4 or 5 kind of headers across the top. I have seen organizations which go a bit nuts with this, and they end up with, say, 10 to 15, and they're coming all the way down to this sort of end of the navigation, and it's just too much. It's overwhelmed. People are not going to properly be able to consume that and find that. So I would recommend that the hub navigation bar is designed to be consistent throughout the intranet. Now, what I mean by that is you will have other sites in your intranet. It won't just be an intranet homepage. There will be department sites. There will be other areas of the intranet for policies or procedures, onboarding information, managers toolkits, things like that. And those are things you might want to link to across the top. And then on the actual SharePoint site itself, you have what they call the site navigation bar. Now, this is specific links to that site that you're currently looking at. And again, only a handful of links there. You can have drop downs on here as well if you wanted to, but that would probably potentially be a little bit too overkill. As I say, we're then looking at kind of the content of the page. So as I scroll down, you actually see that this bar will kind of stick to the top of the page but get a little bit smaller. But everything underneath this line is then the body, the sort of content of the page. Now, with this specific design, I'll show you another one as well in a moment, but often with the internet homepages, nowadays you often have the kind of primary content area on the left hand side, and then a secondary content area like a bar on the right hand side, and we can put all sorts of different things in here. But you can see that this particular design nicely balances, and I was saying before, the difference between sort of balancing navigation versus content. And this nicely balances that because we have content as in a carousel. These are actually news articles which are being cycled round at the moment. And by clicking on them, it will open up the full news article, whether it be a SharePoint news article or linking to a third-party news article on, I don't know, BBC News or something like that, for example. And then without sort of leaving what we call the kind of the fold of the screen, as in anything that's kind of below this line is below the fold, we also have this navigation bar here. Now, I quite like, and again, this is becoming a lot more popular and a bit trendy, rather than just having like something that says useful links or quick links or something like that. It's treated a little bit more like an FAQ, where we kind of say, how do I, and then follow that up with almost like the second half of a question. So how do I find the performance review? How do I take a leave of absence? How do I prepare for my new job? Whatever the kind of FAQ is, and then each of these can then link off to, again, a SharePoint page or another resource which has got a URL. We can easily change the text, and we can change these icons, and these are actually all stock icons directly from Microsoft. There are thousands of icons that you can use for free, or you can upload your own. If you have your own and they're branded, you can upload your own as well, and there's no problem there at all. Further down this design, again, we've got kind of these navigational items, but they're quite visual. We're pairing this with some imagery. So again, we can make the images a clickable button. We can make the text clickable. We can make the little buttons under here clickable as well. But again, this is something that we're pairing off the kind of the navigational items with something that's kind of visual as well, to add to kind of the look and feel of the page. On the right hand side, in our kind of B category of content area here, this is actually a Power App, so we can embed in third-party websites, but we can also embed in things like Power Apps as well. And this is an expense request Power App. So I could access this on a mobile phone if I wanted to, or directly from my internet homepage, I can create a new expense report, submit expense requests, and sort of track the progress of my previously requested expense requests. Further down, we then have our news articles. Now, this is where I was saying before, think about how many news articles are you potentially going to be creating, because that realistically is going to reverse engineer how many news articles you could possibly show on the site. Now, I did say earlier that this is actually a news carousel, so it's a news carousel that's sliding around news. And typically on an intranet homepage, the news at the top, especially if it's a carousel, will typically be news which is aimed at everybody. Everybody should be interested in the types of articles which are being displayed in that particular space. Whereas further down the page, you might have kind of like a B category news area, which is news which is only kind of relevant to specific people, or not necessarily that's coming sort of that's relevant to absolutely everyone. You can even do what they call audience targeting, which means that you can customize the news articles that people see dependent on maybe their location, maybe based on their job role or the country they work in, whatever it is, you can customize it so different news article reaches different audiences. Now, I'm just showing you this as an example. This is senior management team news. So this is news articles which are coming from our leadership team, and we can pull in news from different sources. But if I just show you, if I was to edit the page, I can edit the design of the news article, news web part, and I'll show you a couple of different layouts. So this layout obviously has 3 news articles here, and the latest news article is large on the left hand side. As new news articles are added, it will then kind of push these off the page. So this one will then go here, and then here, and then here, and then eventually push off the page. Whereas if I wanted to have more news articles, I could maybe use something like this hub news. So this is now showing 6 here, and I think it will show 6 here as well. So that's 12 in total. But again, reverse engineer, how many news articles am I expecting the senior management team to publish? If it's going to be 1 a month, I don't want 12 months necessarily of updates to be displayed here, because it will just seem stagnant. Whereas if they're publishing it every week, so this is 12 weeks, that might be right. I might be able to fill this, and that might feel enough that we've got kind of whatever that works out to be 3 months or so ish of updates that published here. And if it was daily updates, definitely I would want to be putting as many on the page as possible, because say, for example, if I was to use this particular layout and it was daily, I'd only have 4 days worth of updates on here before they were to drop off the page. Now, we always have this see all area, So you can always go and see more of those kind of news articles if they were to sort of be pushed off the page as well. As I said, we've got things like events, so balancing this out, so having a bit of events content on there, so we can see things which are upcoming and most popular documents. So I quite like this as well. So when we were talking earlier about balancing manual versus automation in terms of the content which is on here, having things like news articles which are pulling up from multiple SharePoint sites which are creating them is a fantastic way of having dynamic content. But also you can have this sort of web part which pulls out maybe most recent documents or most popular documents. Again, you can make it specific to the current user that's looking at it. There are other web parts as well, things like recent SharePoint sites that you've accessed, recent documents you've opened, things like that you can have displayed on the homepage as well. So again, it's all dynamic content that you don't have to go and manually update, it's just doing it for you. So having most popular documents is kind of like two birds with one stone, because it almost acts a bit like not just content but a navigational web part in a sense, because it's giving you links to documents which people are accessing all the time. They're popular documents, so obviously multiple people probably want to be able to access those easily just at a click of a button. Here's another navigation type of web part. We've got two buttons here, one for work anniversaries, one for promotions. Maybe that's clicking off and going into a separate page, maybe it's a news feed, something like that. And then again, more navigational options here. So we've got this topics by role, and I said earlier on, it could almost be like an FAQ type of thing. These are buttons which are maybe going into a knowledge base or an FAQ section, which are topics based around certain roles of managers, mentors, volunteers, things like that. Then we've got other topics. So again, more like FAQs, but this is still quick links. These are just navigational items. And at the very bottom here, this is another navigational web part, which we can change the text, the background image, and the button as well. And we can change the sizes of these as well if we want them to be much bigger, things like that. But across the bottom, that's quite useful for things like give us feedback forms, surveys, questionnaires, things like that. It's a fantastic place to put this. But again, because this is SharePoint, these are all web parts. We can move these around. It's all drag and drop. So if you wanted this at the bottom rather than the top, it's easy, simple, just to drag and drop that around on the page. Cool. So let's just jump back to PowerPoint. Go to our next slide. So the next slide is about navigation. So navigation is the key to exploring the uncharted, the gateway to discovery, and the path to understanding. I'm not too sure where I lifted that quote from, but I thought that summarized it quite well in terms of what we're trying to achieve with the navigation inside of SharePoint. It's worth mentioning that everyone will find things differently. The way I find things will be different to the way that you find things. So actually, sometimes having multiple pathways to the same content is not a bad idea. You do want to think about the kind of the compromise of duplicating links versus single links. And what I mean by that is, were to duplicate a link, so you're going to have a link to the leave request form, and you were going to put that under, say for example, better example, something like working from home policy. Now, the way I might find that is I might think I'm going to go and check the human resources site for the working from home policy, whereas actually we have a separate section on our intranet called policies, which has all of our policy documents stored in it, and the working from home policy lives in there. Now, I would say that there's no harm necessarily providing the same link. If I was to search underneath the human resources navigation link and provide links to certain key policies within there, the same as putting a link underneath our policy section, as long as it's going to the same document. Now, the only downside to that is if, say, for example, that document was to be deleted or moved somewhere or something like that, then that's when potentially you could find you've got problems, because you've got duplicated links. You've got to remember to update those links in multiple places. So there's pros and cons with that type of thing. Studies have found that eyes naturally, when they go to a website, will start at the top right corner of the website, move to the left, and then move down. And that's why you tend to find a lot of navigation that's built into websites, SharePoint, things like that, will have an element of the navigations across the top and it's often down the left-hand side as well. So keeping that in mind. Now, with there's two different types of SharePoint sites. You've got communication sites and you've got team sites. Team sites have the navigation down the left-hand side, whereas a communication site, like the one we just looked at, it has all of its navigation bars across the top. So what are the types of navigation we got? So we've got things like, I say, the hub navigation bar, which we looked at before. So the hub navigation bar is designed to be consistent throughout the internet. Site navigation is specific to that current site. And then we've got some other web parts as well. So I'm going to show you a few of these. We've got the hero web part, which is like some tiles, which we can see actually as an example in this picture we took here. We've got quick links web part, which is like those FAQ web parts we were looking at before. Highlighted content web part, which is essentially the web part we were looking at earlier, which was the kind of pulling through the most popular documents. It's highlighting key content that is being created within the site. And then we've got the call to action web part, which was what we saw at the bottom, where we're talking about things like feedback forms and surveys and questionnaires, things like that. The button web part was, if you remember, where we had, I'll just jump back just to show you this. This was the button web part. So this is where we've got more information, or click here, or whatever we want to call it. You can change the text here to whatever you like, but that's referred to as a button web part. Image web part, as I was saying, we can also change these web parts here to be clickable hyperlinks as well. In fact, we can even overlay text on top of this. If we wanted to make this space much smaller, we could actually have text overlay the image, get rid of these title text, this body text, these buttons, and we could just remove that completely and just have the image as a navigational web part if we wanted to. Some people prefer to use the buttons because sometimes it's more intuitive that users realize that that is a clickable button, whereas if you were just to provide an image with some text, it's not as obvious necessarily that it is clickable, even though when you hover over them you can see that the kind of the clickable finger appears, but it's not always so obvious. So it's worth sometimes playing around with that a little bit, maybe getting a bit of feedback, producing a couple of different designs, and then getting your users to kind of vote on which they think is actually going to work best for them. So I'm going to actually show you just the hero web part. I'm just actually going to jump to another example of an intranet homepage because, in fact, let me just compare this. So you can see here, this is the intranet homepage we were just shown before. I refer to as the heart, just as a layout. We then have a layout that I refer to as Lighthouse. Now, very similar in concept. I mean, obviously this is much brighter. The colors we're using are much brighter. But very similar kind of layout in terms of we've got this kind of main content area on the left hand side, and then we have a kind of secondary area on the right hand side. Again, we're using this for navigation. Now, this is more like your traditional useful links, quick links. So we're just outright linking to things we know people want to quickly access, things like holiday bookings, office locations, weather updates, expense requests, my tasks, things like that. Now, I don't have a carousel here, so this is what I was referring to earlier about trying to find the right balance. If you're not going to create a lot of content, as in a lot of news articles and things which are going to get published onto the homepage, you're going to lean more towards the kind of functional type of intranet homepage, which is going to be less dynamic. It's got less content on it. It's going to be more about navigational buttons. So this is where we've got like this hero web part, which is up to 5 tiles, and we can change the background image. We can change the title, and we can change the links of where it's navigating to as well. So typical things, I say, employee feedback forms, surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, things like that. Information on benefits, company benefits, employee benefits, company handbooks, as well as things like managers toolkits and things like that as well. Now, some of these navigational web parts, not necessarily all of them, but some of them, definitely things like the quick links web part, the navigation bars across the top, we can also audience target, which means that we can show and hide links, similar to like what I was talking about with the news earlier, that we can show and hide news articles dependent on certain groupings of people based on, I don't know, their job titles, the departments they work in, the countries they work in, whatever it is. In fact, actually, they're all grouped by it's security groups is the way it works. So you can create a security group for whatever you like, but it's those which then are used for audience targeting. Now, quite often that's used across the top, where we might have things like Manager's Toolkit, and it'll only show to you if you are a member of the Manager's security group that manages groupings essentially, so it's audience targeted to only managers, so they only see that. And the same goes for things like sometimes the C-suite or the board of directors. Maybe they've got different links across the top that only they see by being in the kind of board of directors group. So further things down the page, say we've got news. So as I say, because we're not expecting we're going to create a lot of news articles on this particular type of layout, this one's much more functional. We've got less news. We're just showing the latest 2 news articles on the page here. And then we've got some quick charts. Now, quick charts get their name because they're really simple and easy to use. A common question when I show people these is say, well, what about Power BI? I say, well, yeah, you can embed Power BI onto SharePoint, but not everybody has Power BI. Power BI is quite an advanced tool. Now, as I say, you can embed Power BI if you have that, it's not a problem, but you can add these quick chart web parts, which are so quick and simple to update. Literally, just by going in here and changing a value, you can see it automatically changes the kind of the graph that we're seeing here. Now, it's very basic, it's very simplistic. We can either enter the data manually ourselves, or we can pull it directly from a SharePoint list or a library. You can't pull it from anything external without, I say, you could if you were to build, say, a Power Automate workflow or something like that to integrate it, but natively it's only manual data or from a SharePoint list or library, and you've only got the option of a column chart or a pie chart. There's no kind of other options than that. So it's very simplistic, but very effective in a lot of ways. Cool. So just going to go back to PowerPoint, wherever that is. And then the final thing when it comes to navigation is understanding where people are actually going in your SharePoint site. Now, there are some basic analytics built into SharePoint that you can use. So you can go and check this out to actually see, well, actually how many people are accessing this particular page. And you could use this then to inform your kind of navigational strategy. So if there's particular pages that people are accessing a lot, maybe you want to make sure that there's plenty of areas that they can get to that. Or if there's pages, I suppose vice versa, which are not getting much traffic, and you suspect that actually people should benefit from getting to those pages, maybe that's when you go back to your home page and you look at changing around some of the tiles or the navigation to help point people towards that particular page. Now, it's really easy to see page analytics. Every single page in SharePoint has this analytics button. When you click on it, a little sort of pop-out window, blade, whatever you want to call it, will appear from the right-hand side. And you can choose to see things like page viewers by the last 7, 30 or 90 days. And we can print this out. Obviously, this is just a test SharePoint site, so we don't have much traffic on here. It's not the best example. But you can see as a average views, average page views, but you can also see average time spent per user. So say, for example, if people weren't spending very long on the SharePoint page, maybe they've got to it by accident. So you've got to think about the navigational structure of how did someone get to this page? Were they looking for something else that they didn't find on here? Or maybe if they're spending ages on the page, maybe there's too much information, or maybe they're struggling to find what it is they need. And we can also see page traffic by time and day as well. So if there was, again, I can't really think of an example of how this would necessarily trend, but you might notice if there was a particular day of the week that a certain page was getting a lot of traffic or something like that, you could use that in some insights and again, reflect that back into the way that the navigation is set up for your intranet. So that's navigation. I say key things there, just making sure you've got the right balance of navigation and making it easy for people to find what they need to find. The next topic is communication. Now, with SharePoint, I always say that there's kind of 2 main things that you need to focus on: navigation and communication. Good communication on an intranet fosters transparency, boosts employee engagement, and streamlines information sharing across the organization. Now, there's a number of ways that we can achieve good communication with our SharePoint sites, but a lot of it starts with a news feed. So a news feed is crucial for that kind of employee engagement. And what I was showing you before is very simplistic news, but actually we can see in this example here where sometimes, and I've worked with a lot of, especially enterprise organizations, which have a lot of news articles, and they're categorized in very specific ways. So they're tagged with things like the country that they're relevant to, or departments that they're relevant to, maybe their CEO updates. And in fact, you can even build the equivalent of like a news homepage for your intranet. So I'm just going to show you, I think I've got an example of that here. So say, for example, if you've got loads of news that's coming from loads of different areas of your intranet, you could have a page specifically just for news, not even just it's not your intranet homepage. This is maybe a button on the homepage where it says News Hub, and it takes you directly to a News Hub. And this is where you can see maybe CEO updates, so news articles that have been tagged or uploaded directly from the CEO. Maybe you've got recommended. So there is actually a little bit of kind of, I hate to use the word AI because it's not really AI, but there's a little bit of kind of, let's say, black magic in the background of SharePoint, which is focusing on where are you going in SharePoint? What are you doing in SharePoint? And it's trying to understand what you would potentially be interested in. So you can set a newsfeed to actually show recommended content to each user. So this will be completely different for me than if you were to view it. It would have totally different news articles on there. It's all based on where you access SharePoint and what news articles potentially you've interacted with in the past before, what news articles maybe you haven't opened yet. All that sort of stuff is taken into consideration. Then you have news articles, things like My Department, so news articles which are coming from specific business units or departments within inside of an organization. And it knows, say, for example, that I work in the IT department, so it's surfacing news articles that it's found from within the IT department. Or My Country, so say, for example, it knows that I work in the UK, maybe I'm tagged with the London office, so that it's going to show me news articles which are being created in the UK, or tagged with the London office. It's pulling through those news. Maybe we've got industry news, so this probably is going to be relevant to everybody, so this probably looks very similar for everybody. But I say it's very common to have multiple different types of news feeds categorized in different ways, and as I say, audience targeted, so different news articles will appear for different people dependent on a whole host of different variables. So the news feeds provide real-time updates and announcements. So as I say, CEO updates, things like that. And in fact, actually, with those news articles, they don't have to just be news articles. They could be short videos. You can embed what they call stream, and think of stream as a bit like an internal YouTube inside of your Microsoft 365. And essentially you can upload videos, you can upload playlists of videos, but actually what I'm starting to see a lot more of now is, for example, like with CEO updates, or the equivalent of what might have been like a monthly or quarterly update or newsletter, just a short video. It could just be like the CEO sits down in his office, records a little video for 2 minutes, just say, hey guys, this is what's going on with the latest kind of updates and strategies that we're doing, and blah, blah, blah. And then they post that to their intranet. And it, as I say, it could be a news article, but it could also just be a video that's embedded onto your intranet via stream. So keeping employees informed about key events and things which are coming up is critical. Encourages knowledge sharing, so making sure that you've got plenty of information about what's going on around you, but also you could build up as a knowledge base and have sort of articles about things that people have learned and things like that. Engagement via comments, likes, and shares. So with news articles, you can have like a comments feed at the bottom. People can like news articles, comment on them, share them, things like that. Reduce duplication, increase productivity. So again, to be honest, with everything SharePoint, you're looking for ways to kind of reduce duplication. So having the same message split out into multiple places. In fact, a fantastic example of this is if you're already using, say, for example, you've got a newsletter, maybe you create it as a PDF or something like that. You're probably sending it out via emails and things like that. You can actually create news articles, and you can create news digest, which is essentially like a newsletter that then generates an email to your employees that encourages them to come into SharePoint to view the full content. They get like a snippet via email, and then the full content directly inside of SharePoint. As I say, news web parts can be displayed in many different ways. So actually all of these here are just the same. It's the same news web part. They're just displayed this different. So this is a carousel. This is like a list format. This is the smaller kind of grouping layouts. It can pull from, so news web parts, as I say, they can either pull everything, every news article that it finds. It could pull just from one specific location. Say, for example, this CEO updates. We'll probably just have a SharePoint site called CEO updates, and it's just pulling from that one site. Or you can say multiple, so pull from multiple sites. Say, for example, country news. Although it's filtering on the fly me and who I am based on an audience, it still needs to pull in from multiple countries to have the content to be able to filter down. So maybe it's pulling from the UK site, the US site, wherever it is, all these different country-based sites that's pulling in. And then also you can, as I say, make it based on the user. So it just pulls in content that it thinks that that particular user wants to see. You can add filters, so metadata filters to audience target. As I said before, we can filter by multiple different types of groupings of employees. Drive traffic via email newsletters. As I was saying before, this really should be your kind of hub of news and updates, announcements, and you want to really drive people to them and not necessarily be using emails and things like that to give them information. Just almost bait them into coming into SharePoint. And then you can use like the event web parts to communicate key dates. So it might be that you have things like training, webinars, get-togethers, social events, things like that. You can have all of those added to your SharePoint site. So maybe if I just, jump back a step, find page, got events on it. So you can have events here. Oh, I haven't got any populated here. It's not a fantastic example. I wonder if there's any other examples that I've got that might have events populated. No. Anyway, so let's just pretend there's events web parts populated with things like SharePoint training, summer barbecue party, things like that. And in fact, actually, once they're populated, there'll also be a little icon next to it where you can choose to add it into your own calendar as well. So as a kind of reminder, you can have that event put into your own calendar. So moving on, again, similar kind of concept of having content and making sure you've got strong communication within inside of your intranet is integrating video. So research conducted by Cisco, video traffic within enterprise networks was projected to account for about 60% of traffic within corporate networks. So video content is expected more now. So in your personal life, you're probably using Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, loads of other platforms that you're using to kind of consume video content. And it's becoming more and more expected in the workplace that videos are to be created. And it doesn't have to be Hollywood studio quality. In fact, if anything, studies are showing that people often prefer raw videos because they're deemed to be more trustworthy, they're more authentic. So you can embed YouTube as a web part. So you can actually add, there's a YouTube web part you can embed directly into SharePoint, or a stream web part. As I say, this is content internally that you're sharing, but this could be really simple, easy videos. Maybe you recorded them on your phone, or a lot of my videos actually, I use PowerPoint just to record my screen. So as I say, maybe it's sharing knowledge. It's something like, hey guys, did you know Microsoft Teams can do this? And you've recorded your screen with PowerPoint to record that and then upload it, post it onto the intranet, and everybody else can then see that short snippet video. But again, it could be updates from CEOs or whatever it is, but getting video content on there is going to become more and more important over time. That should be something that you're factoring in as part of your SharePoint design. I should also say, guys, if you've got any questions at all, there's a Q&A feature. So there's a Q&A thing at the top of the screen, and you can drop any questions that you have into there. In fact, I'm just going to double check there's So a couple of questions already coming in. So as I say, use the kind of Q&A feature across the top, and I'll try and answer some of these questions as we're going through. So the first one here is, could you share how you set up the web part to show recommended or tag specific news? It's a bit of a long-winded thing, to be honest, so I won't be able to do it directly in this webinar today. I'll potentially put together a separate video on that, but essentially, just to give you the highlights of what you need to do, you need to create a security group. So I would recommend that it's a dynamic security group if possible. Now, what dynamic security group is that you can provide some rules, say, for example, almost like a little bit of logic to say if the employee's department field equals IT, put them into this IT group, and it's a dynamic group. So all you have to do is maintain everybody's user profiles, and if they've got the word IT in their department field, they automatically get added into IT grouping. Same goes if you had a field for like country and you added them and you put in, say, for example, UK, and then you had a dynamic security group that pulled in everyone that was from the UK. You've then got a security group of everybody that's in the UK. That's the easiest way to create those groups. Then you need to apply that to the content. So with news, you would need to go into the kind of the back end, the pages library, enable audience targeting on there so that you can basically tag, like a metadata tag, each of the news articles with groupings. And then the web parts that you display on the home pages, you need to enable for audience targeting and then select which audiences that you want it to essentially use as a filter. So I know that sounds easy and it's a whistle-stop tour, but there's quite a lot of steps that are involved with that. I'm just going to one more question before we move on to the next section, but I'm going to keep stopping to answer questions. So I'm just going to ask, I'm assuming just because this is related to the same thing before, I'm assuming it's the same person. Could you use existing group in Active Directory? Yes, you can use an existing group in Active Directory. So if you've already got that group, perfect. Ideally, it has to be a security group. It can't be, I can't remember what you call them, distribution list. It can't be a distribution list. It has to be a security group when you've got that in Active Directory. As I can see a few more questions dropping in there, please do drop in more questions and I'll definitely make sure that I've answered them as we move through the other slides as well. So content sections. So to kind of talk a bit about breaking up a SharePoint page. So ideally breaking a SharePoint page into multiple content sections improves the readability and allows for better presentations, a presentation of diverse information. So you can see here, this is a little example of sections. Now, before I talk about collapsible sections, I'm just going to go back to this here. And I'm just going to show you, as I scroll through this page, what do you notice that's changing? Now, if anyone said the colors of these sections, that is partially the right answer. The other thing is almost is like the context is slightly changing. So this is another one of these examples where you've got to find the right balance, but there's a balance between having a certain amount of scrolling and a certain amount of clicking on your page as well. Now, some people argue and say that people don't like to scroll, which is true. People don't like to scroll. But then there's another camp where people say people don't like to click, which is true. People don't like to click. So you've got to find the right balance of kind of content of the page. But one thing people have found through studies, actually, if you were to change the color of these sections as you scroll, so almost like every time the fold changes, the color's changing, it keeps people engaged, and subconsciously they realize that the context of the content that they're looking at has subtly changed. So like, this is news, now this is more like navigational buttons and employee information. Now this is news again, but it's slightly different than it was before. And ideally this section down here would be a different color again, but poor example that it's not necessarily changed. But these are what we call sections. So these kind of elements of the page are called sections, and it kind of breaks the content of the page out into these nice individual chunks. And in fact, actually, just last night, Microsoft announced that they're releasing what they're calling flexi sections. Now, sections, as it stands today, right now, as of the 30th of January 2025, you can only have 3 columns in a section. So as in 1, 2, 3. In fact, if I go into edit mode, you'll see this much better. These sections are made up of columns. So this one grey section here has got 3 columns, whereas if I go down, this lighter grey, almost white section is just 1 column. Now, what was announced last night is that these flexi sections are going to have up to 12 columns, which blows my mind. And actually, when you see the modern designs, you'll see why they've done that. It's so you can be very, very specific about where images sit on pages and things like that. And it gives you way more control, quadruple the control than what you've currently got over the kind of design of each of the sections on the page. So let's say those content sections, they're used to be subtly lets the user know that content has changed. It improves user experience for SharePoint pages and increases readability and reduces cognitive load. So what we mean by the cognitive load is that your brain knows subtly as you go through that context has changed, and maybe it will help you skip over things that you're not necessarily interested in, but really focus in on those areas that you are interested in. So it facilitates clear navigation points for the user and groups related information in a logical context. It future-proofs for updates as well, so no disruption of the layout if things are chunked together and you move things around, and enhances a visual appeal, and it's more engaging, just looks better. So I'm going to quickly show you how we can create content sections, maybe a little bit like this kind of FAQs that we see here. So I'm just going to jump back into my design area here. Now, to add a section is really simple. So if I click on the edit option here, I'm going to scroll down. To add a new section, all we need to do is click add new section, and then this is where we can choose whether it's how many columns we want. Do you want 2 columns, 3 columns, 1/3 left, 1/3 right? So just whether there's a section which is big on the left or the right. So I'm going to say 1/3 left in this case. Now, I can also choose to make my sections collapsible as well. So if I go into here, I can say make this section collapsible. Now this is perfect, especially if it's like I'm using it for like an FAQ. So I can say something like, how do I XYZ? As that is almost like the question. Now, when I say make the section collapsible, I can also say whether I want to have a divider, which I typically do in this case if I'm going to have multiple, whether I'm going to have the arrow on the left or the right. I personally think it looks better on the left, but again, it's up to you. And the default, is it going to be expanded or not? Now, I'm going to say no. I'm going to expect people to choose to open these sections themselves because they're going to be, as a collapsible. Then I'm going to add in maybe an image web part. Onto the left hand side here, and this is where I can choose to upload my own images, or I can use the Microsoft stock image library. Now this is where I'm going to say pro tip, take a look at the Microsoft stock image library. If you're not using this already, it's a fantastic tool because there's hundreds if not thousands of different images in here that you can search based on topics. So say for example like office, or by color, say like red, and you can find loads of fantastic imagery in here. So I'm just going to say I'm going to use this like so, and then I'm going to add some text into here. So these are different web parts. I say in a section, because I've got this 2-column section, when I click here, I can just add web parts. I'm going to choose to add in some text web part. Just type in text and text web part, and I might have a title. So maybe make this header. Maybe duplicate that. So I'm going to use a bit of text in here instead. So just normal text. This is some text. Now, obviously, this is not going to be perfect. So I'm just doing this as a very quick example. There you go. And I could even maybe highlight the text if I wanted to click off to more information. Maybe add a button web part in there if I wanted more information, whatever it is. Now, typically with a sort of Q&A or FAQ type of thing, there'll be multiple questions. So I'm going to duplicate this a couple of different times. Obviously, I'm going to change the question. So when do I get ABC. Who to call about XYZ, whatever it is, those questions. Now, all I need to do is click on the republish button and my sections are created and they're collapsible. So you can now see I can open these up and I can see I've got these collapsible sections, really useful, get plenty of content in there, but it reduces that cognitive load, that kind of cognitive bombardment of information, because I've hidden the main information away from your eye, so you don't have to start processing it until you actually click on it to see what the full answer is. So I really like that, and I think that's really useful and something you should be factoring in as part of the design of your intranet. Cool. So I'm just about to come on to the Q&A section here. And actually, that should say SharePoint. Ignore the fact that it says Power Apps. That should say SharePoint. But you can book a free SharePoint consultation with us. Now, there will be a link in the chat, and if you're watching this recording on YouTube, there is a link in the description below. But as I say, you can book a free consultation with us, and we can talk to you about how we can help you with your SharePoint intranet. And as I say, I'm going to now just go to our Q&A. I can see there's plenty of questions which are coming in here. If you're watching this as a recording, as I say, you can pop any questions, any comments feed below. We do our very best to answer all our questions, but just in live time now, I'm going to look at some of these questions and see which ones we can answer. So first question, can you use SharePoint through a mobile app version? Yes, yes, you can. So there is a mobile app that's just called SharePoint. Surprise, surprise. And you can access that on mobile phones, tablet devices, things like that. It is a bit more cut down than the traditional kind of SharePoint. Now, you will see everything vaguely the same, but it is obviously a mobile version of it, so it will be cut down. Now, if you are planning on using SharePoint on a mobile app, I would be testing all of your designs through the eyes of a mobile design. Now, a fun way you can do this, I'm just trying to remember where this is now, but in your browser, if you were to go to remember this is, I think if you click on F12, or maybe even actually a quicker way of doing this, right click and then click on inspect, and this will put you into developer mode. But actually, if you click on this button here, you can simulate. Is it this button? I think it's this button. It's been a while since I've done this, but you can simulate what this looks like in a mobile phone. So click on toggle there, so you can simulate what this looks like on a mobile device. So if I just move this slightly down and out of the way, and you can do this in any browser. I'm using Edge, but you can do it in Google Chrome, and then you can select which device you want to simulate this on. And this isn't SharePoint, by the way. You can do this on any website. This is actually a browser feature. So if I go in to say I want to look at this on a Samsung Galaxy, what is this going to look like? Sometimes you might need to refresh the page, so it's not going to be exactly, and also it's never 100% accurate of what it's going to look like necessarily. But you see, now I've refreshed the page, it looks a little bit more sensible. But this is what our design then looks like, responsive on a mobile phone, specifically a Samsung Galaxy S8. So I would say if you're going to use a mobile app, have a little play around with that, just see what that looks like first, and it gives you a good idea of what it's going to look like on a mobile phone. Hi there. My question I had initially was when designing a page or site, but I've seen examples of custom built sites not using SharePoint and using other tools. My thoughts are, if SharePoint updates itself and you didn't use the standard SharePoint drag and drops, would it break? Does that make sense? Yes, that does make sense. Very good question. There's a lot of third-party tools out there that you could use to design your intranet site. I personally, my motto is I like to use SharePoint out of the box. I like it the native features, mostly because of like what you described there. If there was an update that came from SharePoint and it broke something, you have got to be very reliant on that third party that's designed that package that sits on top of SharePoint, that they're on top of it, that they're going to fix the update and make sure that it's all done and dusted for you. The worst case scenario that I've seen is that people have paid to have custom built SharePoint user interfaces, which are bespoke, they're full of code and things like that, and they live directly on the SharePoint site, but they're not then managed. They're not paying a subscription to anyone. They've just bought it once. And then definitely in those scenarios, Microsoft updates something, it breaks, and if you've not fixed it, your SharePoint site is then cooked. It's done for. You then need to pay for a developer to update it. So I always think SharePoint can do a lot out of the box, and in fact, the major announcement that Microsoft made last night about SharePoint and their flexi layouts and all this sort of things, they've released some images to show what it's going to look like within the next 3 to 6 months, and it looks fantastic. It looks exactly like all these third-party plugin options look like. So I don't think necessarily you need to be going too far after bespoke SharePoint designs. I think you can do a lot with out-of-the-box options. Everything I've shown you today is out-of-the-box SharePoint. So if you like the look of that, as these are just things I've quickly knocked together as a proof of concept. You can make them look even better. So it's all out of the box I've shown you today. Question from David. Hi, this is great. Thank you. Could you show how you add the second and third layers of drop downs from the title bar, please? Yeah, sure. Let me just publish that question so everyone else can see that. So quick one. I do have videos on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, go to Valto, you'll find plenty of videos about SharePoint navigations and things like that. But just to give you a quick insight into how it works, I go to wherever it was that I had. Just go to the SharePoint site that actually had the navigation. So when you click on edit across the top, you'll see that this navigation bar appears on the left-hand side, and you can see actually those 3 layers are represented by these kind of like indentations. So say, for example, if I wanted to add a new layer, say for example under departments, I've got multiple layers here. I've got departments, then I've got HR, then I've got policies. Say for example, if I was to make a new button. Just trying to power through this quickly. Just call this example. Now if I was to click on save, that example link would be at the same layer as employee benefits. So click on save. You can then see wherever that's gone. It should be on employee benefits. Maybe I just need to refresh my page. There we go. Example, it's under employee benefits. Now to move it up a layer, all I need to do is select the 3 dots next to it and say promote sublink. Now you can see it's at the same layer as employee benefits. So if I was to click on save and refresh, you can then see it's now at this layer, the HR layer. And again, you guessed it, if I was to do it again, promote sublink, it then puts it at the same layer as we've got, for example, news, onboarding, policies, departments. Click on save, and then there you go, it's appeared across the top. So you can see there, that's how it works. It's just based on promoting and the sublinks to get them to appear in that 3-layer tier process. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool, we've got loads of questions here. I'm going to try and get through as many as possible as I can. Do you have thoughts on the standalone SharePoint mobile app? We'd like to use the app in our institution, but the mobile app doesn't seem to let you set it to open automatically on our intranet homepage. It just opens showing recently visited sites and news. Are there any other ways of getting SharePoint site into our mobile app? Yes, there is, but I'd say it's quite a bigger kind of topic that I think. If you're interested in that, we can have a dedicated conversation with that. I would say reach out to us after this and we can have a dedicated conversation, but it might be that there are other ways that we could potentially get that to open on your mobile device via things like Intune for like mobile device management and things like that. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, I'm sure we could definitely find a solution. Another question for vertical videos, does Microsoft plan to resize the video display web part so that it doesn't squeeze those types of videos between black bars? Good question. I don't know, to be totally honest with you. I've always found that it works quite kind of well in terms of its scales, but you definitely need to make sure you've got giving it plenty of space on the page. Next question, is it a good or bad method of Is it a good or bad method of settings up separate SharePoint sites for different departments? I mean, I have SharePoint site for HR only, accounts only, and one for general staff. Good question. So it depends how much content each department has. If a department isn't going to have much content, as in they're not going to have news articles, not going to have events, they're not going to have many of their own documents, probably not. You're probably better having an area which is sort of grouped up. Now, there's different types of SharePoint sites. As I say, we've got our team sites, which are for collaboration, for people to work together. And typically every department has a team site because it's for their documents. Nowadays, that's actually in the form of a Microsoft team. So when people are using Teams, that automatically creates a SharePoint team site. But you only create a communication site for a department if they have a lot of materials that they want to share with other departments within the organization. Do you know when the new ×12 column option will be available? Good question. I think I'm right in saying that it's about, they're going to start rolling out March of 2025. So if you take that with a pinch of salt, and maybe think April, May time, you'll probably have it available to you. That's probably about right. Excellent stuff. Keep it up. Thank you. Is it okay to have multiple sites for different departments in a company? So I've just said that before. Yep, definitely. As long as we've got enough content to do that. Just conscious of time, I'm just going to speed run a few of these final questions. But as I say, what I'm going to do actually before I just answer these final questions, I'm just going to put in a link into the Q&A. And you can use this link to book your free SharePoint consultation. So if you click on that link, it should take you to a page with my face on it and a contact form, and that will allow you to book your free consultation. So if you wanted to have a chat with us, we can see how we can potentially help some of these solutions. So a couple of final questions then. Thank you for this. Really excited for the new changes. When will they be out? I would say go and look at the SharePoint roadmap. We'll list out all the different features which are coming out and the dates, but a lot of them are starting to come out in March, but some of them aren't till December. So I would go and check those out and just look at the new features. Hi, really useful. Thanks. We'll receive the recording. Yep. So by signing up to these sessions, you will automatically get an email. Hopefully tomorrow, depends how quickly it processes, with the recording and the link to it, and it's on our YouTube channel, so you can go and check that out there. So just got time for one final question. How does a company balance the news and information side of SharePoint versus the document side? Is it still easy to get to all the files and not get distracted? Good question. So I say I would go back to reverse engineer how much content you think you're going to have, and almost treat the document management as something that's different to the information management. I think of them as two different camps. Quite often it's very common, as I say now, to have things like a policies area within inside of your SharePoint. So like I've got this link across the top for policy management, which takes you just to a specific area for policies. But you could have that for all sorts of things like knowledge bases, things like that, which specifically is just a set of documents, and it keeps it away from your news. And again, if you've got loads of news, potentially think about having something like a news hub to break that away and keep them sort of siloed into different areas so that you can really focus in on the types of content that you want. Okay, cool. That's all the time we have for today. As I say, if you've got any questions at all, do get in touch. Use that link, book in your free SharePoint consultation. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.